Picture this. You're a Swiss explorer in 1812, disguised as a local merchant, heart pounding as you follow a narrow canyon that seems to lead straight into the earth itself. The walls tower 200 feet above you, so close you could touch both sides. You're risking everything: your life, your reputation, your sanity, because you've heard whispers of something impossible. A city carved entirely from rose-red stone, hidden for over 600 years, and then you see it. A facade so magnificent, so impossibly intricate that your knees literally buckle. Welcome to Petra, the city that shouldn't exist, built by a people history almost forgot and lost to time until one man's obsession changed everything. But here's the kicker. What Johann Ludwig Burckhardt discovered that day wasn't just a pretty building. He'd stumbled upon the remnants of a civilization so advanced, so strategically brilliant, that they controlled the ancient world's most valuable trade routes for over 400 years. And then they just vanished. The people time forgot. So who exactly were these architectural wizards who turned solid rock into palaces? Meet the Nabateans. And no, before you ask, they weren't related to the Martians from that sci-fi movie. Though, honestly, looking at what they accomplished, I wouldn't blame you for wondering. Here's what blows my mind. These people started as nomadic traders around the 4th century BCE. Picture them as the ancient world's version of Amazon Prime. Except instead of delivering packages, they were moving frankincense, myrrh, and spices across the most brutal desert routes imaginable. But here's where it gets interesting. They weren't just playing Uber Eats for luxury goods. They were strategic geniuses. Archaeological evidence from excavations led by Dr. Konstantinos Politis shows that the Nabateans controlled trade routes stretching from Arabia to the Mediterranean. We're talking about a network that would make modern logistics companies weep with envy. They built a commercial empire that lasted longer than most civilizations even existed. But controlling trade routes is one thing. What they did next defied every rule of ancient engineering. Because when you're making serious money from trade, you don't just build a warehouse, you build a statement. The impossible city. Ready to have your mind completely blown by what humans can accomplish when they refuse to accept impossible? Petra wasn't just built, it was carved. Imagine taking a mountain and deciding, you know what? I'm going to turn this into downtown Manhattan. The Nabateans looked at solid sandstone cliffs and said, "Hold my ancient beer." The Treasury, that iconic facade that makes every tourist's jaw drop, wasn't constructed. It was sculpted, top to bottom, from a single piece of rock. The precision is so perfect that modern engineers still study it to understand how they achieved those intricate details without modern tools. Dr. Stefan Schmid's archaeological surveys revealed that Petra contained over 800 individual monuments. 800. We're not talking about a small town. This was a metropolis with residential areas, temples, tombs, and a sophisticated water management system that would make modern cities jealous. The Nabateans engineered a water system so advanced that it collected rainwater from a 25-square-mile area and delivered it to the city through a network of cisterns, channels, and pipes. In the middle of the desert, without pumps, without electricity, just pure hydraulic genius. But engineering marvels are just the beginning. Wait until you hear about their secret weapon, the masters of ancient economics. What if I told you that these rock-carving nomads basically invented the concept of strategic monopoly? The Nabateans didn't just stumble into wealth, they engineered it. They controlled the incense trade, and incense in the ancient world was like oil today. Essential, valuable, and absolutely necessary for religious ceremonies across the Roman Empire. But here's their stroke of genius. They didn't just control the goods, they controlled the knowledge. According to Strabo, the ancient geographer, the Nabateans kept their trade routes secret. They spread false information about the dangers of desert travel. They basically convinced everyone else that crossing the desert was suicide, while they were running profitable caravans daily. Historical documents show that a pound of frankincense was worth more than a pound of gold in Roman markets. And guess who controlled the frankincense supply? Our rose-red city builders. The Nabateans developed what economists today would recognize as vertical integration. They controlled production, transportation, and distribution. Amazon wishes it had their business model, but every empire that rises high enough eventually catches someone's attention. And Rome was watching, the collision with Rome. Nothing good ever happens when Rome starts eyeing your profitable trade routes. 106 CE. Emperor Trajan decides he's had enough of the Nabateans' monopoly. But here's what's fascinating. This wasn't a typical Roman conquest. There's no record of major battles, no dramatic siege. The Nabateans, being the strategic geniuses they were, basically said, "You know what? We've had a good run." Archaeological evidence suggests the transition was remarkably peaceful. The Romans didn't destroy Petra, they incorporated it. The city became the capital of the new province of Arabia Petraea, and life continued relatively normally for decades. But here's where the story gets heartbreaking. The Romans were really good at roads. Too good. They built direct routes that bypassed Petra entirely. Imagine if someone built a superhighway that went around your toll booth. That's essentially what happened to the Nabateans' economic empire. The same Roman engineering that made the empire great was slowly strangling the city that had controlled trade for centuries. But the Romans weren't the only threat. Nature itself was about to deliver the final blow. The beginning of the end. Sometimes the Earth itself decides to rewrite history. 363 CE. A massive earthquake shakes the region. Not just any earthquake, geological evidence shows it was devastating. Buildings collapsed. The intricate water system was damaged. But the Nabateans were resilient. They rebuilt. Then came the economic earthquake. The rise of Christianity changed everything. The demand for frankincense plummeted. Christian ceremonies didn't require the same expensive incense that pagan rituals demanded. It was like the entire market for their premium product just disappeared. Dr. Zbigniew Fiema's excavations revealed that by the 4th century, parts of Petra were being abandoned. Not destroyed, abandoned. People were literally walking away from architectural marvels because they were no longer economically viable. The Nabateans began converting to Christianity, but their unique culture was slowly being absorbed into broader Roman and Byzantine traditions. They weren't conquered, they were assimilated. But the final chapter of Petra's story would be written not by Romans or earthquakes, but by the shifting sands of time itself. The vanishing. How do you lose an entire city? Apparently, it's easier than you think. The 7th century brought Islamic conquest to the region. The new rulers had different priorities, different trade routes, different gods. Petra became increasingly irrelevant. The last Nabatean inscriptions date to around 350 CE. After that, silence. But here's the thing that haunts historians. The Nabateans didn't disappear overnight. They faded. Generation by generation, their unique culture blended into the broader population. Their advanced engineering knowledge was lost. Their trade secrets died with them. By medieval times, Petra had become a local legend. Bedouin tribes knew about it, but to the outside world, it might as well have been on Mars. The city that once controlled the wealth of nations became a ghost story. Recent excavations have found no evidence of violent destruction. The city was simply abandoned. Families packed up and left. The wind and sand took over. For 600 years, Petra slept. until one obsessed Swiss explorer refused to let sleeping cities lie. The Rediscovery. Sometimes it takes an outsider to remind the world what it's lost. Johann Ludwig Burckhardt was the kind of obsessed explorer who would risk everything for a rumor. Disguised as a Muslim merchant speaking fluent Arabic, he convinced local guides to take him through the Siku, that narrow canyon we talked about at the beginning. What he saw on August 22, 1812, changed archaeology forever. His journals, now preserved in the British Library, describe his emotions. I do not know with what to compare this scene. Perhaps there is nothing in the world that resembles it. But here's the beautiful irony. Burckhardt couldn't even properly explore what he'd found. He had to maintain his disguise, pretend casual interest, and leave after a few hours. He literally rediscovered one of the world's greatest archaeological sites and had to act like he wasn't impressed. Burckhardt's discovery sparked a century of archaeological expeditions. Every major European power wanted to study Petra. The lost city became famous again. What we know today. So, what have we learned about these vanished masters of the ancient world? Today, Petra is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, visited by over 1 million people annually. Modern technology, ground-penetrating radar, satellite imaging, 3D modeling, has revealed that what tourists see is maybe 15% of the actual city. The rest is still buried, still waiting to tell its stories. The Nabateans left us a masterpiece in stone, but they also left us a lesson about adaptation, innovation, and the fragility of even the most successful civilizations. They were immigrants who became empire builders, nomads who became master engineers, traders who became cultural forces. And their legacy? Every time someone builds something impossible, every time someone refuses to accept it can't be done, they're channeling a little bit of that Nabatean spirit. The story of Petra reminds us that the most incredible human achievements often come from the most unlikely sources. If a group of nomadic traders could carve a city from solid rock and control international trade for centuries, what's stopping you from building something extraordinary? Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories about the civilizations that history almost forgot. And let me know in the comments, what impossible thing do you think our generation will accomplish that future archaeologists will struggle to understand? Because if there's one thing the Nabateans taught us, it's that impossible is just another word for not yet.